Hello guys, I'm Kiri, welcome back to my channel. Today we're gonna talk about a Formula 1 car. A very famous Formula 1 car, a 1954 Maserati 250F. Today you're not gonna see Maserati in Formula 1 races, but was time when Maserati was one of the best cars there. And the car what we have here today, for me is the best ever Maserati race car. Was racing between January 1954 and November 1960. The designer of the car was Gioacchino Colombo, very famous name back on the day in the car races world. Chassis was made by steel, so was tubular frame, independent wishbone front suspensions, Didion tube on the back. The body was made by aluminium, the most common material on that time. The engine, well, in 1954, when the car was introduced, the engine was straight Maserati 6-cylinder 2.5 liters, 2490cc, and was producing 220 horsepower at 7400 rpm. Of course, the car was racing in this class. Then in 1957, the works cars were used V12 natural aspirated engine. The engines, how you can see, is on the front middle and is longitudinally mounted. The gearbox was 4-speed manual Maserati for the early versions up to 1956, and then from maybe late 1955-1956 they were using 5-speed manual transmission. The tires, of course, they are Italian Pirelli Stella Bianca. On that time, for example, this car, maybe the others as well, been using some specific fuel. For example, the fuel the car was using is 35%, just 35% petrol, and then 50% methanol, 10% acetone, 4% benzol, and 1% castor oil. They was adding oil as well. So actually, this combination is very strange, but was working and giving more power the car needs. The brakes, of course, they are 13.4-inch drum, front and rear, but and then they were changed to discs. We're gonna talk a little bit later. The wheels, of course, they are Burani Italian, 16-inch and then 17 inches. But let's talk a little bit about the history of the car. Formula 1 came in 1950. The first race was in Silverstone, England, but on that time was different. So different times, different rules. For example, nowadays you can see two cars only from team. Everyone knows you can see only two Ferraris, two Mercedes, two McLarens, etc. etc. But back on that time, they were allowed more than two cars for one race. For example, in 1957 for the British Grand Prix, Maserati entered with 4 cars. In some races even more than 4 cars. So if the team is rich, can race with more cars. But the first Maserati 250F victory was in 1954, so the same year entered, for the Argentina Grand Prix, where Juan Manuel Fangio won the race. Actually, he is Argentinian, and this was actually big success for him to win at home. And then he won one more Grand Prix for Maserati, for the same year, 1954. So the car was really good. Won the first year the car entered. Juan Manuel Fangio was the most famous driver sitting behind the wheel of this amazing car. The other great name is Sterling Moss. He raced as well Maserati 250F, but his own privately owned Maserati 250F for the full 1954 season. Then he moved to Maserati team, was driving a works car Maserati 250F for the season 1956. But in 1954, how I said, Juan Manuel Fangio was the best Formula 1 driver, but in the middle of the season he moved to Mercedes works team, of course for better money. Then Sterling Moss became a Maserati driver #1 and was very interesting for the Italian Grand Prix, the same year 1954. Juan Manuel Fangio already behind the wheel of Mercedes, Alberto Ascari behind the wheel of Ferrari, Sir Sterling Moss was driven, of course, Maserati, and guess what happened? Sterling Moss overtook them both, Juan Manuel Fangio and Alberto Ascari, but on the end, because of the engine problem, he retired. But he was very impressed of the car, and he said later, Maserati 250F is the best front engine Formula 1 car I ever drove. But next year, 1955 as well, he moved to Mercedes to work like a works paid driver. But on that time, 1955 was different, was interesting as well, because he, Sterling Moss, was driving the works Mercedes, but for different races were allowed, he was driving his privately owned Maserati 250F. So, for example, for some races like Grand Prix of Bordeaux, Grand Prix of Sicily, of Syracuse, etc., etc. So, next season, 1955, the power went up from 220 to 240 horsepower. The brakes, how I said before, they went to discs all around Dunlop brakes. The car was much more better than the previous year, but won actually nothing in 1955 season. The best driver on that time was Luigi Musso. Then, in 1956, Sir Sterling Moss came on board again, but with works car. And he won the most prestigious Monaco Grand Prix and the Italian Grand Prix. Imagine to win Italian Grand Prix with Italian car. Is something amazing. On that time, Alfa Romeo, Maserati, Ferrari, but nowadays only Ferrari can do this. For the same year, 1956, 3 works cars entered the season. So how I said before, 3 works cars, but actually many private owned cars as well, they entered 1956 the season. The chassis was lighter, some other changes, but sometimes they were using the V12 Maserati engine with 315 horsepower. Well, was more powerful, but was better for some tracks, not for every track, because the 6-cylinder car was more lighter, more nimble, better cornering, so for some races, of course, 6-cylinder car was better. But, and then 1957, they improved the V12 car, and Juan Manuel Fangio returned back to the team, and he won 4 Grand Prix races. And of course, he won the title. This was probably the best time for Maserati 250F car. So 1957 is the best year for Maserati 250F. Then in 1958 the car was not concurrential to the other cars. Most of the cars were using they went from the front to the rear engine cars. So they improved the rear engine cars. They were much better, better traction, the stability in the corners. So the cars with the front engines, they were not anymore concurrential, and they were outclassed. For the new Formula 1 rear engine era. But some private teams, they've been using the Model 250F to the end of the 1960 season. Nowadays, this is impossible to use 3-year-old car in Formula 1 race. But was different time. In total, Maserati 250F competed in 46 Formula 1 races with 277 entries. So how I said before, 46 races, but 277 entries. So that's mean in some races they've been using even 5-6 cars. And of course the model won 8 times. The model has 8 pole positions, 10 fastest laps, and won 2 times the Drivers' Championship. So in total, Maserati built 26 cars from this amazing model, Maserati 250F, how I said, from 1954 to 1957. And then the car, some privateers, how I said, they've been using the cars later up to 1960 for some Formula 1 races, but from 1958, 1959, 1960, the car were not concurrential to the other cars. So this is absolutely great model, Maserati 250F. This front engine, maybe one of the worst front engines Formula 1 cars, and of course many famous drivers been driven this car. How I said, Juan Manuel Fangio, Sir Sterling Moss, Luigi Musso, of course they're very well known and very famous Formula 1 drivers. And of course the car is Italian, which is amazing. How I said, the first years the brakes they were for drum brakes, but and then they changed from 1956 they changed to Dunlop discs all around. So they was approving, they was improving actually the car every year. And of course later on in 1956, how I said, they was trying to with the V12 engine. The first year was not successful, but and then 1957, of course, they make the car much better with the new engine, with the new suspensions, new brakes, and new tires, of course, with better aerodynamics. Was much better. And of course, the Juan Manuel Fangio returns back to the company in 1957 to be the works driver, Maserati works driver. So he won the title, and maybe, how I said, this was the best year for Maserati 250 car. So guys, I hope you liked the video about this beautiful Maserati Formula 1 250F car. If you like, please subscribe my channel and see you next time guys. Bye!